I'm not sure about you, but for me, watercolour is the hardest art media to work with. It really does have a mind of its own and takes a lot of skill. So to get better at watercolour, to level up my skills, I decided to spend 30 days working on improving my watercolour techniques. Hi and welcome to Sketching the World. I'm Kat, an artist and writer. I'm based in Australia, but my dream is to sketch the world. So, improving my watercolours, it sounds like a pretty simple thing, but with most creative endeavours, you're not going from a point A to a definite point B. If you say a runner, then your point B is running faster. If you're studying for an exam, your point B is getting a higher mark. But with painting, with any kind of art or even other creative interests, what's your point B? It feels like there's an infinite number of point Bs you could be aiming for. And it's good to define where you actually want to go to before you set off on your journey or climb that mountain or however you want to think about it. For me, the main improvements I want to see in my watercolour, I want it to be cleaner. I find a lot of the watercolour work I was doing was very murky and didn't have that really nice watercolour style. I like an art style that is a lot more expressive and illustrative rather than going towards something that's realistic. I'm not that interested in spending a lot of time on perspective and that type of thing. So yeah, flattening things, simplifying them, and getting a nice clean image. That's my point B. But of course, it's different for every single person who's looking to level up their art skills. So for you, what is your ultimate destination? Before I get into the lessons I've learnt, let's take a quick look through a funky little montage at the paintings I've produced over the last 30 days. I think there's been a bit of improvement, but let me know what you think. Now on to the lessons I learned. It's funny, you can hear the same advice over and over, but until you actually try to put it into practice, that sort of doesn't gel. Well, that's the way it works for me. It might take a couple of paintings, it might take a lot of paintings, but eventually it starts to click in my head. Lesson 1, keep it clean. Oh boy, is this important with watercolour, and it goes against my personality style so much. I'm so slapdash and don't like keeping things neat and tidy, but when it comes to watercolour, of course, the more you dirty your work materials, the dirtier your end painting's going to be. So this includes palette, keeping your palette clean, which is a kind of hard thing because once you put the paints on your palette, you think, oh yeah, I can still keep using those. They'll reactivate. And sometimes, yeah, that works really well. But you need a clean mixing surface. There's no point mixing paints on top of other paints or getting your paints all dirtied. And they're all bad habits that I have. And then your brushes. Brushes need to be clean, of course. I have a bad brush cleaning habits as well. And of course water. Water is the basis of watercolour, and you need clean water. I've got a big bucket that's got 2 sections, and I'm always putting my brush into the wrong section and yeah, getting the dirty water, not the clean water. But yeah, just get up and change your water. That's what I need to do. Keep that clean, keep the water I'm using for my painting nice and clean, and the end results will be a lot cleaner. The second lesson I've learned is pre-planning what I'm doing. If you're working in oils or acrylics, you don't have to worry about this. You can just scrape away what you've done or paint over it. With watercolour though, once you put the paint down, you can only go over with a darker colour, of course. Keeping white areas on your paper is super important. And yeah, so you need to actually think about how you're going to put that paint down, what areas you want dark, what areas you want kept white. Using masking fluid, of course, helps. But yeah, there's a lot more planning in watercolour painting than any other kind of art, I think. When I look at some of the sketches that I've done over the past 30 days, I really wish that I'd spent some time doing some preliminary sketches first and sort of worked out all the big shapes and what's actually going on in the reference I'm using and how I want to put that onto paper before I even started painting. But of course I just rushed straight in and got the paint down. But maybe in future that's something I need to think about when I'm using watercolours. Thirdly, another thing that totally does not work with my personality type, and that is patience. Oh, I am the most impatient person in the world. I am so impatient, and that makes it really hard for me when I'm doing watercolour. I don't wait for my paint to dry, and you really need to just need to get up, walk away, maybe make a cup of tea or something, and let the paint dry completely before I do the next layer of paint. Not working in, I think, yeah, well, obviously you can do wet in wet. You can work with wet paint in watercolour, and then you can put the wet paint over dry paint. The big issue comes when you're working into sort of half-dried paint. You've got one layer that's semi-dried and you decide to chuck another layer over the top, and it is not going to give you a good result. It makes things murky and not look good. So, oh yeah, the other thing about patience too, if you're doing like a line and wash drawing, if you're using ink, then make sure the ink dries. Oh, how many times have I started doing watercolour over half-dried ink and just got splodgies everywhere. So yeah, patience. It's a lifelong learning thing for me. And not just with painting either, but I think in every aspect of my life. The next thing is, I guess, what you would call attitude. The sort of way you approach your painting. I think that subtlety is very important in watercolour, being very subtle in how you lay down the colours and maybe trying to build up layers rather than getting things done in the first take or the first pass through. But at the same time, confidence is really important. You only have one chance sometimes to put down a brush stroke, and how you do that can influence the whole work. It can make or break your whole sketch, your whole painting. So yeah, being very confident and not tentative with brush marks, and also not like working the brush strokes too much. If you can use one brush stroke, use one instead of scrubbing back and forth and just getting all bitsy about things. So yeah, having that confidence to work how you need to work is so important with watercolour. Next up, tonal values. Well, tonal values are important in all artwork, but I think with watercolour especially, you really want to avoid getting that washed out look. To be honest, if I'm looking at people's Instagram feeds and I had to give them people who do watercolour on Instagram post their watercolour on Instagram, and I had to give them advice on what to level up on. I know they're not asking for my advice and I don't give it unsolicited, but I'd say 90% of people, I look at their work and think more tonal range. You work on the tonal values more than anything else. But at the same time, it is watercolour, you want to have that subtlety, so you don't want to have too much tonal range. You don't want to be putting down just pure, straight from the tube watercolour. So it's a balancing act, but tonal range really makes the artwork, in my opinion. And that is something I've been working on. One thing I found that's really good for this is doing something that's a little bit monochrome, working with a picture, a scene that doesn't have a lot of colour going on, and just keeping that monochromatic is the word I'm looking for here, keeping it monochromatic. I found doing some scenes of snowy landscapes are perfect for this because, yeah, there's not a lot of colour variation going on in the reference. So yeah, try painting snowy landscapes. It's a great exercise. Next lesson, use your really nice art supplies. Don't hoard them away. Use the best materials that you can afford. I mean, not all of us can afford to go out and buy the really expensive watercolour paper or really expensive materials, but use the best that you can afford and don't put them away and think, oh yeah, I'll use them one day when I get better. The day I got out my, well, expensive to me, Ache watercolour paper, I never use it because I'm always, this paper is too expensive, and so I just leave it sitting on the shelf. But when I started painting with it, it was so beautiful to paint on. Oh, it just felt so nice. So yeah, use the good stuff. I will be doing that in future. The thing I always think is, I'll use this when I'm going to do a really great painting, when I'm doing something that's going to work out absolutely amazing. But I don't know that before I start. Maybe you do, but I don't think many people actually know whether their painting's going to be like, you know, in the top 10% of paintings I've ever done, or the bottom 10% before they even start. So how do you know when you should be using your good materials? Of course, you can't use them all the time if you're doing just some warm-ups, some exercises, or playing around. Yeah, you want to use cheaper stuff, and you don't want to go bankrupt buying really good paper. But again, use the best materials that you can afford to use. So other than that, these aren't really lessons that I've learned, just things that I've found out about myself. One of the things I really like is painting with tube paints a lot more than with the half pans, the dry half pans. I like being able to make up mixes to the consistency I like, and I find that I can do that a lot more accurately with tube paint than I can with a half pan. Also, I find it really hard to use half pans if you want to use bigger brushes, and trying to get those into little pans without getting some of the colours around it onto your brush as well. I like painting I like painting water. If you've noticed something about the paintings I've done over the last 30 days, I just automatically am drawn to pictures with water and buildings. I love cityscapes. So 30 days of painting in watercolour. How did I do? When I look back at the work I've done, I was really hoping for this video I'd have this really like wow in your face improvement, that I'd start with this really crappy watercolour on day 1, and by day 30 I've got something that's just mind-blowing. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. There were some paintings I did that I really love, some that I'm really happy with, but nothing that's like really blowing my mind, to be honest. And when I think about that, well, 30 days, like, yeah, it's only 30 days. It's such a small period of time, really, and it's, yeah, maybe too much of an unrealistic expectation to have a really drastic improvement within that time. But I do feel I'm getting closer and closer to my goal of simplifying things and how I use colour. I'm finding my colours get a lot less muddied than what they were. Sometimes I just need to walk away from a picture. I overwork, and I've done that since I did my first finger painting in kindergarten. I remember my teacher in kindergarten telling me, oh, you should have stopped working on that a while ago. So it's, yeah, another lifelong thing that's sort of going against my personality. There's a lot in watercolour that actually does go against my personality, I have to say. And my sister said to me the other day, well, maybe watercolour isn't the medium for you, but it's something I really love. I love the magic, the effects you get when the colours just mingle together and create all those gorgeous granulations and things like that. So I think that makes up for having to correct all of my bad habits. But yeah, I'm really happy I've done the 30 days of watercolour. I might keep doing this some more. I'm going overseas next month. I've mentioned this a lot. I'm going to New York next month, and I'll be away for a month. So I think when I get back, then I might get back into the watercolour. And one of the really good things about this is that having just the watercolour out and on my art desk ready to use has just made it so that I'm thinking in watercolour, if that makes sense. When you've got all your art materials or some of your art materials packed away, I tend to be the kind of person who just grabs whatever's closest to hand, if that's coloured pencils, if it's markers, if it's crayons. I'm using what's there, what's next to me. So having, the watercolours actually set up on the table so that I can just sit down and start painting has made a huge difference, I think. And if you want to get more into watercolour or into any kind of media, I totally recommend having it there, having it at your fingertips. making it the whole process a no-brainer, so you can just sit down and start painting, not having to go through all your materials to find the watercolors or to find the materials you want to use, having the brushes handy, cleaning up after each session so that everything's clean. Oh, who am I kidding? I don't do that. I try to clean up at the end of each session so that things are ready to go the next day. So I hope you've enjoyed seeing my 30 days of watercolour and hearing about the lessons I've learned. I hopefully will be doing some more, maybe one day having that wow, mind-blowing end result, but that might be a little way off. If you enjoy doing watercolour and you've learnt stuff from your experience, let me know about it, because we're all on a learning journey together, really. Some of us are at the beginning, some at the end. And I just use the word journey like I'm on a reality TV show. But yeah, so we're all learning together. And so sharing tips and sharing your experiences helps everyone. And as usual, thanks for watching. I'll be back. I've actually got another video with some fun watercolour exercises coming up. So keep an eye out for that. And thanks for watching.